A decision is made in the Breonna Taylor investigation.
I understand that as a black man, how painful this is.
All eyes on Kentucky. One officer charged.
Justice sought by violence is not justice. It just becomes revenge.
The clash between police and protesters as the city of Louisville prepares for the potential of a rocky night.
The decision before my office as the special prosecutor in this case was not to decide if the loss of Ms. Taylor's life was a tragedy. The answer to that question is unequivocally yes. My job as the special prosecutor in this case was to put emotions aside and investigate the facts to determine if criminal violations of state law resulted in the loss of Ms. Taylor's life.
Today will forever be etched in our history. It's been almost 200 days since the raid that killed Breonna Taylor.
Former LMPD Detective Brett Hankison is the only one facing charges, but it's not for Taylor's death. Hankison could spend up to 15 years behind bars for shooting into Taylor's neighbor's apartments back in March. Hankison was booked into the Shelby County Jail and already posted his $15,000 cash bond.
Of course, many people have strong feelings over this decision, some taking to the streets moments after the grand jury decision was announced. We have team coverage tonight around Louisville. First, we want to go to WDRB's Dalton Godby. He is live downtown. Dalton?
Dozens of arrests already made just moments ago, Chris, and we've seen arrests being made really since that decision came out at about 1:15. I want to show you LMPD lined up here on Market and 6th, blocking off this area. You see those officers in riot gear. You take a look behind me, and KSP has arrived just moments ago, them also in riot gear with riot shields as well. All of the protesters have seemed to move down 6 back towards the Jefferson Square Park area, some lingering right now, but compared to what we saw about 10 minutes ago with some really physical altercations between LMPD and the protesters, those have calmed. Protesters have moved back into the Jefferson Square Park area, other than those who are kind of lingering here on 6th. We saw dozens and dozens of arrests. We've seen arrests happen all day. Katrina Helmer brought you those earlier in the 4 o'clock hour, with arrests happening in the Highlands area as there were some run-ins with LMPD there. And then obviously a little after 5 is when LMPD cut off protesters on Market Street, blocked them in, told them it was an unlawful gathering, an unlawful protest. They were blocking the street, and that's when LMPD moved in from both sides of Market Street. And for the ones that didn't obey their commands, they did get arrested, and it got physical for a moment. Kind of a frightening scene there when LMPD surrounded those protesters, and there were punches being thrown. There were people being taken to the ground. It was really an aggressive scene that we saw there, and even an officer had to be carted off by 2 other officers. He was limping, holding his leg, as 2 officers carried him off of the street into a vehicle. So certainly a tense moment there, and the anger from these protesters after today's decision. You can hear it in their voices, you can see it on their faces, and hear it in those chants. They're angry, they're upset, they're not happy with what the justice system did to Breonna Taylor. They feel like justice has not been served in the slightest way. They feel like this is not what should have happened. This is not what they've been demanding for more than 100 days now, with demonstrations in downtown Louisville and across our city. You can see, though, gathering back here at Jefferson Square Park. A lot of these protesters have renamed this Breonna Square in honor of Breonna Taylor, calling it Breeway. You hear those chants every so often whenever you are standing here in this area around 6th and Jefferson. You continue to hear the chants, no justice, no peace. So many of these things being said constantly for over 100 days now, as these protesters continue to fight for justice for Breonna Taylor and for so many others who they say died at the hands of law enforcement around our country. No sign of LMPD or Kentucky State Police at Jefferson Square Park, although you do see some armored vehicles down Jefferson Street right now, but no sign of the National Guard, LMPD, or any kind of law enforcement here right now at this particular moment. And there's not a lot happening here other than just the protesters kind of standing around at this point in time, just, I guess, waiting to see what happens. I do want to point out we are less than 3 hours away now from this city's curfew. Mayor Fisher announcing earlier the city is in a curfew from 9 p.m. tonight until 6:30 tomorrow morning. St. Matthews also following suit with that curfew as well. We'll continue to follow this throughout the evening and bring you updates live and online as well. But for now, reporting live downtown, Dalton Godby, WDRB News.
Dalton, thank you. And while you're talking about it, too, I want to make sure that we mention that curfew does not apply to people who are working or going to church downtown. So if you have a job downtown, you are still allowed to come down here, and that curfew doesn't necessarily apply to you. Now we want to go to Frankfort, where this decision came down just a few hours ago.
Our Stefan Johnson has been down there covering Daniel Cameron's press conference. Stefan?
Well, good afternoon. After meeting with Breonna Taylor's mother, Attorney General Daniel Cameron held a press conference behind me here at the Kentucky History Center to share some of the details of the investigation. He started by calling this case a tragedy. He also said after being given all of the evidence in the case, the grand jury ultimately determined that only one of the officers should be indicted. As we've been reporting today, the grand jury indicted Detective Brett Hankison on 3 counts of wanton endangerment. Cameron said that the investigation found that detectives Jonathan Mattingly and Miles Cosgrove were justified in their use of force after being fired upon by Taylor's boyfriend. After going over all of the evidence in the case, Cameron then turned his attention to protesters who had already started to gather in Louisville and here in Frankfort.
I urge those protesting on the streets to remember this. Peaceful protests are your right as an American citizen. Instigating violence and destruction are not. I'm committed to being part of the healing process. When tragedy occurs, we must mourn. We must also do everything we can to prevent it from happening again.
They knew that the public wasn't going to be happy with it, and of course, like Daniel Cameron said, there's not going to be positive reactions. It's really sad, it's disturbing, it's sickening, it's disheartening, but it's also like a motivation too to try to make things change at some point.
And those protesters gathered right here outside the History Center and listened as Cameron presented those findings to the media. Right afterwards, they shared their comments or thoughts with us. A lot of them were very disappointed. In fact, a few of them said they were headed to Louisville from here to join protest again in Metro Louisville. Live in Frankfort, I'm Stefan Johnson, WDRB News.
Stefan, thank you. And a lot of people are reacting in their own ways to this announcement. Mayor Greg Fisher this evening reacted to today's announcement and had this message for those who feel the charges fall short of what they consider justice.
The case is far from over. The FBI is still conducting its own investigation, which the Department of Justice will review to determine whether there were any violation of federal laws, including civil rights violations.
Fisher.
Also, LMPD is conducting a professional standards unit investigation to determine if any policies and procedures were violated by officers involved in the case.
Fisher says depending on the outcome of those investigations, it's still possible that Sergeant John Mattingly and detectives Miles Cosgrove, whose bullets hit Breonna Taylor, could be fired. He also says he wants the Attorney General to release any portions of the grand jury report that do not jeopardize the AG's or FBI's investigations.
Meanwhile, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is calling on Attorney General Daniel Cameron to release the facts in the Breonna Taylor case.
I think trusting people with the information and putting it out there so that at least they can evaluate. I just think that that's the right thing to do. And again, I think General Cameron believes in truth, and I believe in truth. I'd just like for people to see the information so they can determine the truth.
The governor says he's requesting that the information be posted online. He was asked if he thinks justice was served today, and he responded by saying, quote, "We need to see the facts and evidence." Beshear says systemic racism exists in the country and in Kentucky, and hundreds of years of pain need to be addressed. He went on to tell protesters he's listening, but asked them not to engage in any type of violence.
And in less than 3 hours, starting at 9 tonight, Mayor Greg Fisher sets a countywide 72-hour curfew.
Most of the violence that we've encountered over the past few months has occurred after dark. So we're asking that if you decide to join a protest, you wrap things up by 8 o'clock or so, and so you can start to head home and be home by 9 p.m.
Mayor Fisher signed his third executive order this morning. All of Jefferson County will be under a curfew from 9 p.m. until 6:30 a.m. The curfew will go until Saturday and does not apply to those who have to get to work, get medical aid, or are going to church. Fisher declared a state of emergency for the city yesterday, signing 2 executive orders which allow him to exercise any of his emergency powers. All Metro government buildings will be closed the rest of today and tomorrow. St. Matthews has the same curfew as well. And because of the curfew, Trinity High School announced the cancellation of this Friday's football game against St. X.
Nothing new for this time of the year and what this year has brought to us. So you take it in stride, no use getting upset about it, and you start planning for possibly when the next time you can practice and possibly when the next time you can play.
The game is now tentatively scheduled for next Friday, October 2nd at 7:30 p.m.
Many things will be closed or won't be in service. The Jefferson County Clerk's office will be closed tomorrow. If anyone needs help, they can reach out by calling or going online. Louisville Free Public Library closed at 1 p.m. today and will stay closed until tomorrow as well. It says people can make an appointment for curbside pickup. Computer use will need to be rescheduled. And TARC is suspending all transit services. That started tonight at 6 o'clock. Service will continue tomorrow.
Time to take a quick break from news and get right on over to Mark Weinberg.
Now, at least I can tell you that the weather's pretty quiet outside. We have a couple of areas that are dealing with some showers. What you will notice is none of those are in the metro, and these are in the southern part of our area. So let's go south, and you'll notice as we look towards Adair County, this is going to be just south of Columbia is where we have rain. Glens Fork through around Bryan would be the few locations. And in motion, you can see it's just struggling on the northern edge. And I think this is a theme that we will see. So as we look outside over downtown Louisville, we do have cloudy skies right now. Temperatures today have been generally pretty comfortable, sitting at 71 degrees. The dew point being low is the one thing that has defended us from seeing rain. I mean, I know we need that rain. However, with dew points being low, with our humidity at 57%, that moisture is struggling to make a northward move. So will that change as we move through the evening? There's 7, there's 9, and there's 11. And you can see that drier atmosphere continues to hold strong through the evening. I think it's going to let go a little bit tomorrow. But if you do have any plans this evening, know that I think generally it's just going to be dry. At 9 p.m. I've got 67. You'll notice at 11 p.m. I bump up to a 10%. I think there is a slim chance of showers tomorrow, and I'll go through the locations most likely to see that coming up.
All right, Mark, thank you. And we continue to follow these protests happening in downtown Louisville right now. This is Jefferson Square Park, and we were looking at this shot just a few minutes ago, and the numbers have seemed to be growing by the minute as people are protesting this announcement from Daniel Cameron's office.
You can see several folks down there in their masks. Of course, this is all playing out in the COVID-19 era. We're going to have continuing coverage, much more when we come back right here on WDRB News at 6. And while things are relatively calm right now, that was not the case a little bit earlier today. I want to show you a piece of video. This happened within the course of the past 90 minutes. You can see police marching down the street there, and they definitely clashed pretty quickly with some folks. Several people were detained. Pepper balls went flying as well. And it's unclear if any of these people who were detained were arrested. Acting Chief Robert Schroeder, he was with Mayor Fisher earlier at 5 p.m. in a press conference. A reporter at the press conference asked how many people were arrested. He did not have that number for us yet. So it's unclear if these people who were detained were in fact arrested or not, and if they were, what charges they could possibly be facing. But it seems every time that police officers move into an area, that's when the protesters and police really start to clash, and that's where the energy levels rise. And these protesters say they want justice for Breonna Taylor, and what happened here today with
Former Detective Brett Hankison only being indicted on wanton endangerment charges. To them, that is not justice.
It seems like these dust-ups are happening and then everything's calming down and then it will happen again. So certainly kind of hard to just put a label on what this night is going to be in Louisville. We're just going to have to wait and see. Dalton Godby live downtown right now. We want to check back in with him. Dalton?
Well, it's certainly interesting to see how this is playing out in downtown. Obviously, there was a bit of an altercation about 50 minutes ago with LMPD here on Market Street. You see them still blocking off that intersection there at 6th and Market. You take a look over on the other side here in this parking lot. KSP kind of here as backup. They've probably been standing here for at least half an hour or so, just ready to act if need be. You see those riot shields, that riot gear that they have on. I just spoke with our Travis Ragsdale a moment ago. He told me that he was with another group of protesters a little bit ago that was on Bardstown Road. They have just made their way back here, and I think moments ago you saw them marching up 6th, heading back to Jefferson Square Park. It seems that there have been several different groups of protesters set up across the city. Now a lot of them kind of migrating back toward Jefferson Square Park. Just a couple of minutes ago, our WDRB photojournalist, Emily Evans, she pointed out that there are actually nails all over the ground right here, probably several dozen, at least 2 or 3 dozen here at the corner of Congress and 6th, where we saw LMPD and protesters square off earlier. Nails here, broken glass here, not sure where those came from, but they are here in the middle of the street, and certainly if a tire were to run over those, I don't believe it would last. But you look up down 6th Street, you see protesters gathering now, some of them even climbing on these plow trucks that have been set up as barricades, and just a large group really forming here as we continue to walk down 6th Street and move towards Jefferson Square Park. As you see the protesters are really gathering there. As I pointed out earlier, it seemed like there were 4 or 5 different groups and sections of protesters kind of spread out around downtown Louisville. There was a group that got into that altercation with LMPD officers earlier on Market Street. There's a group that has been at Jefferson Square Park for quite some time, and at least 2 groups from Bardstown Road. All of them seem to be back here downtown at Jefferson Square Park at this point in time. There are barricades set up all around this area, and now we see protesters climbing on the trucks that are being used as barricades, those plow trucks from Louisville Metro. Just a lot of standing around. It's really a different feel, a different tone, a different vibe than we have seen really for quite some time. Other than right now, and we're finally starting to hear some chants, it's just been a lot of standing around. And a lot of it, just a different tone than what we've seen so often down here at Jefferson Square Park. But now that the protesters are all here, the groups have kind of formed together here downtown, you hear the chants continuing right now as you listen in.
Dalton Godby live in downtown Louisville near Jefferson Square Park. You notice I'm seeing these plow trucks out in the middle of downtown. It reminds me of the presidential visit that we had here last year. These are the same sort of precautions that the police and the city took to make sure that everyone stayed away from the president. So you can see how seriously they're taking all of this.
Right. The mayor saying earlier today that those plow trucks and those concrete barriers that you see all around downtown,
Tyler,
the mayor saying that those were put in place to protect protesters because he wanted them to have a space that they can freely express whatever they're feeling. And we are seeing these emotions play out here in that live video. Still saying her name, still saying Breonna Taylor.
We're going to take a quick break, a quick pause. We'll be right back right after this. Protesters clash with police. This happening in the Highlands this afternoon in the wake of the grand jury announcing its decision to indict one former LMPD officer in the Breonna Taylor raid. We've seen a strong response from protesters today, not happy with that decision. And this isn't the only time protesters clashed with police.
Now, this right here, this happened minutes ago downtown on Market Street. You can see police moving in on protesters. WDRB crews have seen police make several what we think are arrests. We have seen several people detained throughout the day, many of them sitting down, their arms behind their backs in either zip ties or handcuffs. But it has been quite a day, like we were saying in commercial break just a moment ago. it feels very calm. And as our reporters out in the field have been saying, the tone is different here. Many of these protesters saying that they're just in shock a little bit after the announcement that came from the grand jury, and only choosing to indict one person, that is former officer Brett Hankison, on 3 counts of wanton endangerment, but not for Breonna Taylor's death, for shooting into Taylor's neighbor's apartment.
Kentucky AG Daniel Cameron says the 2 other officers who fired their guns that night, Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly and Detective Cosgrove, were justified in their actions and will not be charged. Let's go back live downtown. WDRB's Dalton Godby has been there all afternoon near Jefferson Square Park. Dalton, what are you seeing?
Well, Chris, you saw just a moment ago when you were with us that there were a lot of these protesters climbing on those plow trucks that are being used as barricades. It seemed like some of the protesters who are trying to lead this rally, lead this demonstration, were upset with the people that were doing that and tried to get them down off there. They gathered here around this barricade and said, hey, stop doing that. Leave the trucks alone. Let's be peaceful. And after that, as we made our way closer up to here, we had several of the protesters come and try to shove our cameras down and tell us not to be pointing the cameras in the direction of the protesters. Even had some of those people stand in the way. One of them actually grabbed our camera and grabbed my phone, trying to not allow us to record or video in this direction. Not sure what the reasoning for that was, but now things are kind of back to normal here just in Jefferson Square Park. A lot of protesters continuing to be in the streets, a whole lot of standing around. You heard some chants earlier, but now just some kind of lingering here in the Jefferson Square Park area, as it just seems people and protesters are waiting, just waiting to see how this night will unfold, what will happen with LMPD, what will happen with the National Guard that's been deployed, what will happen with the curfew. And again, we'll remind you that the curfew that the mayor put in place here in the city of Louisville begins at 9 p.m. tonight. Less than 3 hours from now is when that curfew will start. It will last until 6:30 tomorrow morning. And there are several people exempt from that, like people who are traveling to work, to and from work. But again, a lot of people just kind of waiting to see what will happen. Some people telling me they don't care about a curfew, they'll be here anyways. We saw LMPD intervene when people broke the curfew that was in place back in late May and early June. That is when LMPD really began to get involved back in those instances. It will certainly be interesting to see how that plays out tonight if there are large groups who stay past the curfew. Looking back down 6th Street, it seems that LMPD has kind of cleared out of the area. I see a couple of officers lingering around there. Maybe a dozen or so, but not compared to the 20s or 30s of officers that we saw about 15 minutes ago. I don't see KSP either, although they could be still behind Metro Hall, kind of waiting to see what plays out here downtown. But here in Jefferson Square Park, there is no sign of law enforcement at the moment. Just these plow trucks, just kind of people hanging around, lingering. You hear chants starting back up. Right now, I would say there's several hundred protesters here, as many of these groups have kind of come together here at Jefferson Square Park. We'll keep an eye on it, see how this situation plays out, and if law enforcement will get involved here downtown this evening. But for now, reporting live, Dalton Godby, WDRB News.
All right, Dalton, thank you. And to recap, after months of protests, a decision from the Attorney General Daniel Cameron, the grand jury indicting one former LMPD officer in the raid on Breonna Taylor's apartment. 2 others justified in their actions.
AG Cameron met with Breonna Taylor's mother and then the media today. WDRB Stefan Johnson breaks down what Cameron said about his investigation. Stefan.
Well, after the grand jury report was released, Attorney General Daniel Cameron, as you said, met with Breonna Taylor's mother and then held a press conference behind me here at the Kentucky History Center. Cameron started by calling the Breonna Taylor case a tragedy. He then walked us through some of the evidence that led to the indictment of Officer Brett Hankison. Cameron admits he had to put his emotions aside and look at the facts and evidence in the case. He says on the night that Taylor was killed, the evidence shows police knocked and announced their presence before breaking down the door. He says Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, fired a shot that hit Officer Jonathan Mattingly in the leg. Mattingly and Officer Miles Cosgrove then returned fire. The Attorney General says that the officers were not charged because the shooting was determined to be justified.
Justice is not often easy. It does not fit the mold of public opinion, and it does not conform to shifting standards. It answers only to the facts and to the law. This is a tragedy. And sometimes the criminal law, is not adequate to respond to a tragedy.
As Cameron was making his remarks, there was a group of protesters right outside the museum here, gathered in this parking lot. It started with just a few of them, and then swelled to about 40 or 50 protesters. After hearing from the Attorney General, they were not happy with the decision and had a lot of concerns about why the other two officers were not charged. Again, Cameron laid all of that out in his press conference. Meanwhile, those protesters, after leaving here, some of them said they were heading to Louisville to join protests there on the ground in Metro Louisville. Live in Frankfurt, I'm Stefan Johnson, WDRB News.
All right, Stefan, thank you. Let's talk again about the officers. Brett Hankison charged with 3 counts of wanton endangerment today for the shots that entered a neighbor's apartment with a man, pregnant woman, and child. Cameron says Hankison fired 10 times. Some of those shots entered the neighbor's apartment.
And now turning to Miles Cosgrove. Attorney General Daniel Cameron says he fired 16 shots from the doorway of Breonna Taylor's apartment. The FBI says Cosgrove fired the shot that killed Breonna Taylor. She was hit 6 times. The Attorney General also saying that one shot that was fatal to Breonna Taylor. She would have died after 2 minutes of being shot. Cosgrove not charged, and Cameron says his actions were justified.
And then there's Jonathan Mattingly. He led this raid. He's the only person to enter the apartment. He fired 6 shots back after initially being fired at, according to the Attorney General, from Kenneth Walker. Cameron says Kenneth Walker's shot hit Mattingly in the leg. He was not hit with friendly gunfire. Again, he has not been charged. Cameron says his actions were, in fact, justified.
And in reaction to this news today, protesters have been taking the streets in Louisville, in downtown Louisville along Bardstown Road, really voicing their opinion on what they think of these indictments or lack thereof, because they wanted all the officers involved in the raid on Breonna Taylor's apartment to be to be fired and charged.
We have our crews fanned out across the city. We'll have continuing coverage when we come back as we give you a live look at Jefferson Square Park in downtown Louisville.